If you think his silence is the thing that hurts a woman the most, let me tell you something honestly, woman to woman. There is something far more painful than silence. And once you truly understand it, you will never look at relationships the same way again. Because silence still carries emotion. Silence can still carry longing, hope, attachment, waiting. But there is a moment in some relationships where a woman suddenly realizes something much deeper. She realizes his heart is no longer emotionally reaching for her. And honestly, that realization hurts far more than silence ever could. Now, before we go deeper into this conversation, let me say something important. This is not about manipulation. This is not about revenge. And it's definitely not about teaching women how to win emotionally. Because emotionally mature love should never feel like a game. This conversation is about emotional reality. It's about the quiet shift that happens when someone finally stops abandoning themselves emotionally, trying to hold on to another person. And many women experience this without even realizing what they're actually feeling. You see, a man going silent is not always the painful part, because many women can still feel emotionally connected during silence. They still feel his attention, his emotional energy, his waiting. Sometimes a woman knows he's still emotionally focused on me, even if he says nothing. And strangely enough, that can still feel emotionally comforting because the emotional connection still feels open. But what deeply unsettles a woman is when she feels that emotional attachment quietly disappear. Not dramatically, not cruelly, not bitterly, peacefully. That's the part many women struggle to explain. I once knew a woman named Claire. After her relationship ended, the man she loved stopped contacting her for a while. At first, she assumed he was trying to make a point, trying to create distance, trying to protect his ego. And honestly, part of her still felt emotionally connected to him. She kept checking her phone, replaying memories, wondering if he would eventually come back. But months later, something changed. Not in his words, in his energy. She noticed he no longer seemed emotionally attached to the outcome anymore. He wasn't trying to prove anything, wasn't trying to trigger a reaction, wasn't trying to make her jealous, wasn't quietly reaching for her attention anymore. And that was the moment she truly felt the loss. Not during the silence, during the emotional release. Because silence can still carry hope, but emotional detachment carries acceptance, and acceptance feels final. Now, let me say something carefully here, because this is important. I am not talking about emotional coldness. There's a difference between someone becoming emotionally healthy and someone becoming emotionally cruel. Emotionally mature detachment is calm. It's grounded, peaceful, self-respecting. It's when a person stops trying to force love where consistency no longer exists. And honestly, many women feel this shift deeply because women are emotionally intuitive. A woman can often sense when someone is still emotionally orbiting around her. And she can also sense when someone quietly returns back to themselves emotionally. That shift changes everything. Because now the relationship dynamic is no longer centered around emotional chasing. Now there is emotional stillness. And stillness can feel terrifying when someone was used to emotional access. You see, many relationships quietly become emotionally addictive. One person pulls away, the other chases. Then they reconnect. Then confusion returns. Then distance happens again. And eventually, people mistake emotional instability for love. But emotionally mature love feels different. It feels safe, consistent, grounded, not emotionally exhausting. And one of the hardest things for many women to experience is realizing a man no longer needs validation from the relationship to feel whole. Not because he stopped caring completely, but because he finally stopped abandoning himself emotionally. That realization forces many women to confront something uncomfortable inside themselves too. Because sometimes we don't miss the relationship itself. We miss emotional access. We miss knowing someone is emotionally available to us whenever we need reassurance. And when that emotional access quietly disappears, it can feel deeply unsettling, especially if we never realized how much emotional comfort we were receiving from it. But honestly, this conversation is bigger than relationships. This is really about emotional self-worth. Because emotionally healthy people eventually stop measuring their value by who chooses them. They stop chasing clarity from inconsistent people. They stop shrinking themselves to maintain emotional closeness. They stop over-explaining their worth, hoping someone finally understands them correctly. And instead, they begin choosing peace, quietly, consistently. And woman to woman, that kind of emotional growth changes a person completely. You carry yourself differently. You stop reacting to every emotional shift. You stop obsessing over mixed signals. You stop trying to decode someone's silence constantly. And slowly, you start returning to yourself again. That's the real transformation. Not becoming emotionally unavailable, becoming emotionally anchored. There's a huge difference. Emotionally unavailable people shut down. Emotionally anchored people simply stop abandoning themselves for love. And honestly, that kind of peace becomes very attractive. Not because it manipulates anyone, but because grounded people create emotional safety around themselves. They no longer operate from fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being chosen. And when fear no longer controls someone emotionally, their entire presence changes. Now, of course, this doesn't mean heartbreak suddenly disappears. Emotionally mature women still feel sadness, still miss people, still grieve relationships that mattered. But they stop allowing emotional pain to define their identity. That's where healing truly begins. Not when someone comes back, not when someone apologizes, but when you finally realize your emotional peace matters too. And honestly, that may be the deepest lesson of all. Because what often hurts more than silence is realizing someone has quietly made peace with losing the relationship while finally reconnecting with themselves. And whether we admit it or not, that kind of emotional freedom changes everything.